Welcome to Stoic Conversations. My name is Caleb Ontiveros.
And I'm Michael Tremblay.
And today we're going to be doing a proper review of Christopher Nolan's Odyssey. So I did a short solo episode on, that's episode 230 on Stoicism in the Odyssey. And Michael and I have also covered the Odyssey as such in episode 215. But this episode, it's going to be a movie review now, proper movie review, just an appraisal of the movie as such. Will be one amongst the pantheon entries of the podcast reviews of this movie. So we'll see how we can rank against other reviews, but it's something we have now both seen, and to be honest, I think it'd just be fun to talk about.
Yeah. I mean, we're both, I was looking forward to this one. I mean, part of the reason why I read the Odyssey, or I recommended, I was like, let's do a episode on the book and I'll read it, was to prepare for this movie. So it's been a long time coming. I was like, I want to be in a position where I can properly evaluate Christopher Nolan's Odyssey against Homer's. So now we've come full circle. We've seen the film, and I know you feel the same way, but it's interesting to both of us how these ancient stories and myths and, ancient Greece in general is represented in modern media and how people think about it, how they relate to it. That's always an interesting topic. And this one is not just, we did a movie review on a small indie film about Seneca. This is not that. This is shaping up to be the film of the summer, maybe the film of the year. Probably going to get a lot of people into classics, a lot of people interested in Homer, and then from there, maybe interested in Stoicism or other aspects of the ancient world. So, like you said, just would be fun to talk about our thoughts on the movie, and for no other reason than that.
Yeah, in the past episode, I covered some connections with Stoicism and the Odyssey, and we'll release a piece on that to the Stoa letter as well. But this conversation will be broader, just really Mike and I talking about what we thought about the movie, what we liked about it, what we didn't like, and what we thought was interesting. So.
Yeah, and then obviously this will be having spoilers because we'll be talking about things that happen in the film. And, there's a bit of joking about whether or not you can spoil the Odyssey. People always make that kind of joke about, can you spoil something written thousands of years ago? But Christopher Nolan makes some decisions about what to represent and how to change the story. And I think you can certainly spoil that. So I think it's worth watching. If you haven't seen it yet, if you clicked on this episode. And so I think that you probably are best off watching it and then coming back and listening to this instead of the other way around. With that context, go ahead.
We should also say, so I was a little bit of a detour, but it might be interesting before we dive into the specifics to just sort of give a broad take on the movie and perhaps history or what other films of Christopher Nolan's you've seen before, just so people get a sense of our tastes, I suppose.
I generally like Christopher Nolan. I think he's very good. He's not like my favorite person ever. I know that Interstellar is, I think, maybe the best reviewed film on Letterboxd right now, but that kind of falls to me in the same category as The Shawshank Redemption in terms of being just like a very good movie that most people think is a very good movie, but is not my favorite movie. I don't think anything Christopher Nolan's done is in my top 20, maybe even 50 films, but I think he's like a consistent 8 to 9 out of 10 director, and really makes a great kind of blockbuster, high budget film that's also a bit intellectually challenging or wrestles with some interesting ideas. In terms of the film itself, I liked it. I would probably give it like an 8 to an 8.5. I think it is Christopher Nolan's Odyssey, which we'll get into in the conversation, that he is making some decisions about what to emphasize. It's faithful, but it's colored both through having to reduce it to a 3-hour film. I listened to the audiobook, and that was like a 12-hour audiobook. So you're choosing what to cut. So it's filtered through what to cut. And then even there's some decisions around how much to lean into the mythology aspects, the worlds of the gods, how real are the gods, versus a kind of a more realistic take on the story. So he's making some choices there, and then some small changes. But I think most of those are in service of the 3-hour runtime and done well. And we'll get into this when we talk about what we like, but I thought it was told earnestly. Like it was an earnest attempt at a genuine epic, which is the way I would like to see this movie done, as opposed to some sort of subversion or some sort of extreme shift. If you think about Margaret Atwood, did the Penelopiad, which is a retelling of the Odyssey from Penelope's perspective. And that is intentionally this kind of subversion, this kind of twist on the story and the narrative. And I don't think Nolan's doing that. That was not my reading of it. He's not trying to mess with the story too much, although he is updating it slightly for a modern audience and for what he thinks is important. So yeah, positive. I'm generally positive on it.
Yeah, I thought it was a good but not great movie. And unlike some other good but not great movies, I had some parts I really liked and some parts I really disliked. So perhaps it's a high variance in that respect. But I'm torn. So we'll talk about this some more. In some sense, if you were wanting a mainstream movie about the Odyssey now, you could say this is a fantastic movie in terms of what you could realistically expect to be produced. It's done very well. It's certainly very entertaining. But maybe if you have higher standards than that, then maybe the film doesn't come out so well. It is useful to think about it in terms of Nolan's other movies. I do like Memento. I liked quite a lot. That's probably one of my favorite movies. I probably definitely put in my top 50 at least. And I think it's also a good movie, very close to a great movie. And then I have a soft spot for the Dark Knight films, at least the first two. And Prestige was awesome. Inception was quite good. I did not like Interstellar. Positively did not like Interstellar. So we have that in common. But anyway, that's a quick take on some of Nolan's other movies. Tenet I like a lot, I think, but I would say it's not a good movie. It's very entertaining, and I like it a lot. But yeah, let's just jump into it and get down into the specifics. What did we think was pulled out some more? I think you've touched on a little bit about how you thought this was a legitimate adaptation. I know other people have argued it's not Homer and that's not good enough, or there is a sense in which the work subverts the Odyssey. So I wonder if you could say more about that.
Yeah, so one thing that Nolan does is he adds his own, so this is something that I liked about it. He adds his own thematic spin to the material. And sometimes it feels like he's kind of like bashing the audience over the head with the idea, like the amount of times they mention Zeus's law and you're like, okay, this is important. This is the theme. You got to pay attention when we're talking about Zeus's law here. But he definitely knows how to draw that kind of thematic core. So for me, there's a lot of different themes in the Odyssey as a book, and then Christopher Nolan kind of narrows into one. And what I took as this main question is you have this idea of Zeus's law. So this is, what we owe other people, what we owe our guests, how to properly host people, and then how to properly act as a guest, and the kind of mutual trust and respect that comes out of that, whether that's the basis of morality itself, there's some sort of, inherent good to that, or whether that's, maybe like a consequential argument. Like it could be, sometimes they say Zeus's law is the case because it could be the gods in disguise. You have to be kind to strangers because they could be the gods in disguise and you don't want to disrespect them. So it's this kind of like consequentialist argument. But you establish this theme of that. And then you obviously have the suitors who are disrespecting that rule. But at the same time, you have Telemachus and Penelope who are, confined by having to support the suitors, respect the suitors, kind of obey their half of the equation as they wait for Odysseus to come home. And so there's that dynamic, and that dynamic was always there in the original. But I think what was added into this is this idea of Odysseus's guilt and Odysseus's responsibility in breaking Zeus's law, in this plan behind the Trojan horse. So Odysseus kind of relied on the trust of the Trojans to overcome them. They brought in the gift, accepting it as a gift, not over questioning it too much. And so that was how Odysseus won the Trojan War. And so there's this question of hypocrisy. There's this question of guilt that he feels over having done these things. I think he feels pretty explicitly in some of these scenes kind of shame or horror at the slaughter of Troy. This kind of question of, is there hypocrisy in expecting that in his own house when he did not extend that in the Trojan War? And they also have this idea of kind of, we are the sea people, which is, some people are making fun of for being kind of clunky, but there's this idea of the Bronze Age collapsed because there was these invasions. It's this, actually, my understanding is it's not the contemporary classic understanding of how the Bronze Age collapsed, but there was this old theory that the sea people invaded and caused the collapse of these Mediterranean empires or civilizations like the Greeks, but also harmed the Egyptians, the people in Cyprus and things like that. And so there's this pretty explicit theme that breakdown of that law of mutual respect was caused by Troy, was in part caused by Odysseus. And so, how angry can we be with the suitors when we ourselves, have tricked others, have done this when it's suited us, have acted in our own self-interest? And my final point on that is that I just don't think that's in the original. It's not, I'm not an expert on Homer, but it wasn't in my reading of the original. At the very least, it's really much more heavily emphasized in Nolan's depiction. And I think it's an interesting question. I think it can be an oversimplification, or maybe we're moving away from the Greekness. Like, I think one thing Homer's comfortable with is Homer's more comfortable with sitting in Odysseus kind of not being the best guy. Like, Odysseus can kind of do some bad things and not feel guilty about it. And that's fine, because heroes can be complicated as long as they're kind of great and excellent. But then Nolan's taking it, I think, kind of modernizing it, and Odysseus feels pretty guilty in this for his complicated nature, or for his participation in things that we would today see as not being honorable. So, I mean, that's pretty much it. I appreciated Christopher Nolan taking a stand. I watched the movie with my wife, and when we left, we were talking about this idea. There was like that pretty explicit theme, and it was the philosophical question we were able to like debate around, instead of it just being this epic that has a bunch of vague themes. It was crystallized around this main idea of, what do we owe other people? What do we owe guests? And, what can we expect when we haven't extended that to others? Also like the Cyclops, for example. What can we expect from our guests when we ourselves have been a poor guest? And so I liked that idea. I thought it was an interesting question.
Yeah, I agree with that in the sense that I think the film is a proper adaptation of the epic, and it's not merely subversive, or I guess there are some works where it seems like they're adapting a work without respecting it or something of that sort, and I didn't get that sense from the film at all, even though I know others have argued differently. And one thing I liked about it, and I know this is mixing our topics together, but I think they're related, is that it feels like an American Odyssey made today. The characters talk like Americans, or at least modern English-speaking peoples. They have a mix of ethnicities in a way that I didn't find distracting, but I think captures, at least to some extent, the demographics of places like modern America, modern Canada, and such. And the concerns, Odysseus is not an sort of alien Bronze Age character, and you could make that film, and perhaps that film has a better shot of being a great film, but this version of Odysseus is recognizable in his habitat as a Bronze Age type character, but he's sort of an American transported back into that environment, and he has concerns related to not just moral norms like Zeus's law, Xenia, and so forth, but recognizable concerns where he's balancing, the needs of his people and what he's called to do by Agamemnon, balancing his love for his men with wanting to get home, thinking about when to tell the truth, when not to tell the truth, and so on. So in that sense, I thought it's a proper American Odyssey, and it's interesting to think about, to think through the film through that lens and see, like, what does that say about our concerns today, America and such today. I don't know how you feel about that as a Canadian living in America now, but
I think it's a similar. I think it's a similar point to the one I was making. What would those points be? It would be guilt over war, guilt over exceptionalism, over like winning, while also deeply wanting to win. There's some sort of, those are things that Odysseus feels. There's also some sort of like the siren scene where he weeps and talks about like not wanting to come home. So I think there's maybe this like desire for adventure, mixed with kind of a duty to return. I try to think of what would some of those other things be for you that you think, what is the Americanization or, the modernization? What else is that changing?
Well, when he goes to the court of Menelaus and Helen, those are recognizably American characters. There's a obvious strife between the two. Menelaus doesn't talk. He doesn't have the same kind of nobility or self-command that he does in the original poem. There's also there's the goatherd who plays a very recognizable mentor character to Telemachus, who the mentor, the martial arts mentor, guru, old guy who's disabled but has an insight into martial arts, and he's like, your dad was a great man, kid, or is a great man, and so on. Like this guy could be just plopped into a number of films. Is very recognizably an American character. So, and part of our self-mythology, I think.
He's blind, but he can see, or something like this. He's got wisdom. So that was, and I think that's an important point to raise. I don't necessarily think it's a negative, which is that, sometimes they do these things that feel foreign. Like I know they have that scene where they're euthanizing puppies. And so it feels like there's some scenes in there that are supposed to be just supposed to emphasize the cultural differences, the cultural dissonance. But then nothing else was really that extreme. I mean, maybe this will get down into...
Yeah, that's almost the only one, apart from the sack of Troy, perhaps. Mm-hmm. The only scene where I initially saw that scene, I thought, oh, this is going to be a different movie than I anticipated, but it didn't turn out. It was really more of a hint, I think, of something else, or maybe something that the film went into background.
Like one other point, they so in the original book they kill all the maids or the servants, and now they don't the female ones that have been like colluding with or sleeping with the suitors, they don't do that in this one, or at least they don't show it explicitly. And the other thing is, that kind of ending action scene where Matt Damon has like 3 arrows sticking out of him, and he's taking on everybody and like he's outsmarted them. He needs to somehow in that final battle scene both outsmart everybody, but also not do anything that's perceived as being particularly cruel. Like it has to be fair enough that he's not seen as like trapping them or like slaughtering them. so they do it in the scene where he's like very brave and it's very even because it's like 40 against 1, even though he has a bow. Um, but in the original book, they trap all the suitors in there without weapons, and then Odysseus' son comes to his aid. The other loyal servants come to his aid, and it's a bit more of like a slaughter, at least until the suitors can begin to defend themselves. And so that's maybe another part of the Americanization of not wanting to portray Odysseus in a way that makes people feel too complicated, so that he can maintain a bit of that hero status.
Yeah, it's got to be a fair fight.
Yeah, and so even though he's got a bow, they start dropping in the weapons and dropping in the spears and the swords and all those things.
Yeah.
Cool. Anything else? Anything else on that one?
No, I don't think so. Let's ping pong them.
Cool. So one of the other things I really liked about it was there was a degree of horror and kind of incomprehensibility in the villains. So Circe's magic, where she's turning his crewmates into pigs. The Cyclops is a genuinely terrifying scene. As someone, I love horror films, and I found the Cyclops scene genuinely terrifying. Those giants on the island, Scylla, the 6-headed monster that picks up some of the men that you never really get a good view of, never really captures it clearly on camera, even if it's coming down and picking up the men. I thought that did a good job, because I've been thinking about, we did in our C.S. Lewis episode. C.S. Lewis has this idea that you can kind of turn things, mystical things into nature by understanding them. We did with the example of, lightning originally it's Zeus, and then you just understand it as the movement of electricity. And there's a way of doing these monsters in a way that's kind of hyper realistic, that kind of removes some of the mysticism of them. And I really like that, Circe's magic system wasn't explained. The Cyclops wasn't explained other than being a son of Poseidon. And I think that's when these are the most effective, is when they're in the Odyssey. There's this kind of reverence for the world outside of human civilization, for this like dangerous, wonderful, magical place. Wonderful, not in like the good way, but like in a descriptively kind of like invokes wonder. And I think that's really preserved in the way that they portray these monsters, as opposed to, like, if you think of something like Harry Potter, which obviously the Odyssey is not that, but there's this attempt to kind of incorporate magic or incorporate dragons or elves, or not elves, but these mystical creatures into this world. And I think it's better off for having not done that.
Yeah, I agree. You don't use there's a scene with the giants where it's nothing but action. It's really not explained at all why they are being attacked and such. There's the sirens are given an air of mystery. They're not entirely revealed. It's somewhat of a foggy scene, right? Most of the focus is on Odysseus during that scene, and the Cyclops scenes are done very well. I thought that was totally engrossing. In some ways, it seems like there's Nolan is sort of intentionally ambiguous about the nature of the supernatural in the film, because he downplays the gods, and there's certainly a naturalist reading you can have of the gods in the movie, but you see other supernatural characters from the Cyclops to Scylla to the magic of Circe. So you can make a naturalist reading of that with a film as well. It's something about Odysseus's memory or something of this sort, but it's ambiguous.
Yeah, I saw in a different review, someone pointed out that those creatures are only portrayed in Odysseus's telling to Calypso, Like it's only in Odysseus's recollection as the lotus is wearing off that you get the Cyclops and Circe and Scylla, and that would be the kind of way to preserve the naturalist reading. I think it's more fun if it's not the case, because I would hate to go full naturalist in Odyssey. I think you really lose something there. But that is one way you could read it, as you said.
Yeah, you also have the idea that somehow Odysseus is related to the sea peoples, but he was supposed to have been taken out for 7 years on Calypso's island. So maybe you can resolve that tension if you have a more naturalist reading. But I don't think the film leaves that as a question. I don't think there's a decisive answer to that, which is fine. And overall, I totally agree that these scenes were done well. My favorite scene, related scene to this, is the one with the sirens, not just because of the sort of supernatural element, but also because you get to see the adventurer side of Odysseus, where the character's like, "Why do you want to do this?" And Odysseus essentially says, "No one else has done this before," and goes ahead and ties himself to the mast to hear the siren song. I think that was a fantastic scene. I wish that there was more of that adventure Odysseus in the film, because that is such a enchanting part of his character, I think. But that's more about the nature, I suppose, of the Odyssey I would have liked to see than a criticism of this depiction.
Yeah, that was one of my funniest moments for me when I originally read the Odyssey. It was like, I don't know what I thought happened in the siren scene, but I thought maybe Odysseus had to have his senses about him so he could like navigate people around the rocks, or Odysseus was, he was tied to the mast as some sort of punishment. But it's hilarious when you just read the Odyssey and he's just like, nah, like I'm just the captain. I get to do the fun thing. Like, I want to do this just because I want to. So isn't this really dangerous? Is there any practical benefit to this? Absolutely not. I just want to. And you're going to do what I say. It's a funny quirk of his character.
Well, the pursuit of knowledge, I think, and you can argue this as advice, but I think that's why he wants to do it. He wants to have that experience.
Yeah, but I think there's some knowledge that is better not had. I don't know.
Yeah, that is and maybe that might be what this film suggests in some, or at least the ending of that. Yeah,
he doesn't seem better off for it. Great. Anything else you want to? Any other pros for the film?
Yeah. Well, one other way I think something this is related to my initial point is that Odysseus is shown as a American hero in the sense that he doesn't, I suppose I could just say hero. This isn't a particularly American point. He's shown as a hero who doesn't shirk responsibility. He's always navigating between Scylla and Charybdis, as it were, a rock and a hard place. Just from the very beginning of that film, you have that discussion with him and Penelope, where Penelope asks why he must go with Agamemnon to the Trojan War, and he explains that failing to do so would either endanger Penelope and his son or endanger Ithaca as a whole. So the best thing to do is go to war and win it as fast as possible and such. And then, of course, you can see with the interactions with his men as well, he's thinking about, how do I balance respecting my men's choices while taking full ownership as a leader for these men's lives and such. And sometimes that requires rhetoric, deception. Certainly you get a little bit of a sense that he's a tactful leader in the film. But I think something else you see here, another example of this is in the Cyclops scene where he returns to attack the Cyclops as they're escaping. And one of the his secondhand man, as it were, scolds him for doing this because there's again, no practical benefit to that act of revenge. And his response, which is a part of the adaptation that fits in with this theme, is, look, this Cyclops just ate one of our friends. Right, he shows a talisman of one of the fallen friends, and this is something that he carries with him. And I think part of respecting that friend's memory was to give the Cyclops more to remember about them. So I generally like that. And of course, it also fits in with the theme of guilt and wrestling with past decisions. How do you make sense of, these having to be in these tricky places where it seems like there's no good option. But what I especially like about that is you don't get the sense that he's evading responsibility, except perhaps in the Calypso island. But ultimately, he doesn't evade responsibility or push it onto someone else or storm too much against the gods or something of that nature.
Yeah, so 2 points I want to make with that. I'm going to jump into one of the points I didn't like. The first point, I like this idea of agency, and agency requires constraints, it requires hard decisions. And so if I think of the Iliad, what is the kind of key virtue and key vice of the Iliad? Maybe it's something around courage versus anger. I don't know, something like that, but it's about, the course of action is somewhat clear and you just kind of have to do it. Maybe that's an oversimplification of Achilles in that. But I think I think the Odyssey is definitely about this virtue of kind of like wisdom. It's about his intelligence. It's about his capacity to navigate complicated situations. And so you've got to set him up with complicated situations. You've got to set him up with conflicting scenarios, the rock and the hard places, as you said, and see him try to like navigate that on his feet to display that virtue in practice. He's obviously courageous, certainly by modern standards, does a ton of scary things, but it is constantly, there's an aspect of choice to it. In the moment decision making, which highlights his ability. And then the first thing that I didn't like when we get into that is that I think we actually remove some of that agency. And I think this is part of the way to Americanize him and make him a more sympathetic hero. Or I don't even know if it's making him a more sympathetic hero. Maybe it's not doing that. But I think one thing Christopher Nolan does is he removes the agency because he removes the possibility of viable alternatives for Odysseus. So one of the major things that gets cut from this movie is that Odysseus ends up on this island of humans. Phaeacia, I always have trouble saying that one. And there's a princess, Nausicaa, who's, young and lovely and loves him. And they're like, why don't you just stay here and you'll be happy? And there's lots of great food and there's men that respect you. And it is like a genuine alternative. It's not there's the question of becoming a god with Calypso. Calypso in the book actually offers him, the capacity to stay with me and become a god. So you've got this kind of idealized god or like demigod life. You've got this idealized human life. He spends a year with Circe in a romantic relationship in the original Odyssey. And what he does in these situations is he chooses to go back to Penelope. He discards these viable alternatives. I don't think in the movie you lose this human island. You lose Nausicaa at all. With Calypso, his memory is gone. So as soon as he like regains his agency, he's like, I want to leave immediately. There's not this kind of like wrestling or decision making. I would say not in the same kind of way. And I don't think there's this offer to become a god, at least not, or immortal, at least not explicitly from Calypso. And I would have liked to have seen a little bit. I think that is like, I don't know, it's romantic. It's like affirming of his decision. He's not just homesick or guilty. He's like, I don't have to go home, but like I really want to, and I'm choosing to do that instead of this. In the movie, it's Charlize Theron, but like it's this desert island where they're like, there's nothing there. It's not really nobody would choose that. Where he has these alternatives, he's giving up in the epic, and I think we lose something by losing that. We lose his agency, as you were saying.
Well, I don't know if we lose his agency so much. I think you can still act as an agent within serious constraints and without having temptations. But I would agree that there is a number of themes that are lost by removing the choice of immortality. In a way, the poem says more about human nature than the film can, perhaps, because of that choice. It says more about life and death. But that I can see why they did that, but it certainly is a loss. Yeah, and it's part of losing the supernatural element.
Yeah, that is true. I would have preferred.
As you
I don't
say.
know if it's necessarily a criticism. I don't think it makes it a bad movie, but I would have preferred more gods. I'm like, give me genuine Athena. Give me shape shifting Odysseus who actually turns into an old man and beats up beats up another guy. Give me that. There's that scene in the Odyssey where the poem where Odysseus is turned into an old man, but then kind of rips his cloak off and he still has his jacked body, and everybody's like, who is this guy? I like the, I mean, that's not a criticism of Nolan. I think you need to make some trade-off decisions, but I would have liked to have seen a double down in that.
Yeah, absolutely. I would too. That would have been the movie I would have wanted to see. But again, there's already so much in the movie that I wouldn't fault it too much as its own work on its own terms. Perhaps maybe it does have less to say about some of these other themes we touched on, but I don't know if it's a serious critique of the
Mm-hmm.
film.
And then, so what about you? What are some things you didn't like about it?
Well, I think this is somewhat related. I thought the movie was largely, I was completely immersed in it until some of the scenes with Calypso, because I thought it was rhythmically on point, but the Calypso character as much I didn't like, apart from it being Charlize Theron. It seems like she's some kind of, this is some way in which the film being more modern doesn't work out. She's a also recognizable character, but it's an older new age hippie type or something of this sort. And she says gaslights Odysseus, basically saying, I thought you wanted to eat the lotus plant. That's why you've been hanging around. That's why I've been feeding you the lotus. And then has this theme about how Odysseus needs to let go and stop trying to control everything, and then just somehow get back onto this broken raft and take the punishment he deserves, that he will get from Poseidon. And as long as he accepts it, then he'll be good. And all that sounded like some less than ideal modern therapeutic ideas, and a little sloppy. And there's a similar scene in Interstellar with Anne Hathaway talking about how love is at the nature of the universe. It completely broke the immersion for me. Didn't rhythmically work, and it just seemed like it was just tossed in and not really developed too much. This idea of control, is that what we see? Odysseus has accepted his fate, decides to give up control, and then it's so maybe that's a more new age theme, or if you want to be more charitable, more of Eastern style theme to the film. Is that what you see at the end? No, you see him taking control, continuing to be deceptive, saving his son, and then killing the suitors. So I think even thematically, apart from, I think it's just not a good theme. And then even if it doesn't work in the movie as a huge takeaway, it's a little bit of a break.
Yeah, I don't even remember it, so it clearly didn't resonate with me. I don't even know what you're talking about. I can't remember whatever advice she gave him before he left on the raft. In one ear, out the other for me. I think we also lose some stuff in that scene. A lot of this review ends up me comparing to the original, and no, he's stuck with 3 hours, but you lose also the abuse that to me is implicit in the original. Like he is afraid of this god, and he's basically being kept as a sex slave. At least that's one way to read it. And he can lean into that and kind of accept that position. But I don't know. We lose the interest there, and then I lose that interesting part of it. And then, as you said, I think if you lose the interesting part of it, what are you left with? You're left with this kind of hippie who's like, we can just hang out, man, and who then gaslights you. But also, I've just fed you this poison for 7 years, but you were still really sad anyway. And yeah, I don't know what to do with that. It clearly didn't resonate with me because I don't even, I agree that he doesn't accept his fate. That's not really his approach. It's not what he chooses to do.
Yeah, you could almost make it work if you take the idea that it's like being a sane person waking up in an insane asylum.
Mm.
And, you have this idea in other literary works where, of course, you think you're sane, you're insane and such. You could almost have that reading of the scene, but I don't know if it exactly works. I just don't think it worked like that. It seemed that, but I think that's a more interesting, perhaps more charitable interpretation of what's going on there. Because then he would be trapped. He's trapped and drugged and so on. What else do you have?
I think I've hit on most of mine. I think that it's the intervention of the gods. So one thing that I would have liked to have seen is I would have liked to have seen a little bit more explicit role of the gods. I mean, like Athena is a character, and we've lost that character. And in that way, it becomes so Athena in this, played by Zendaya, is very passive, possibly a figment of Odysseus's imagination, only appears for Odysseus, doesn't appear for Telemachus like she does in the original, is also certainly sanitized, made to be kind of weak and passive. There's that scene, I'm still not quite sure how to interpret it, that scene at the end where, you see Zendaya dragged out and, killed during the sacking of Troy. So there's maybe some symbolism there around the destruction of the old gods, or the destruction around the kind of moral structures the old gods provided. That's just not the original story. The original story, Athena is a character and is intervening. And there can be some symbolism in that too. There's obviously symbolism in that original story. But we've lost that. I would have liked to have seen that. I would have liked to have seen Poseidon actually be angry at the crew instead of, again, we've talked about this, but this reading where maybe the crew is just saying, oh, Poseidon's really mad at us now, and that's why there's a bunch of waves in the sea, although waves happen all the time. It's just not a very mythical reading, and I don't know how to square that with something like literally visiting the underworld at the same time. I don't know why we're able to visit the underworld and we can't have Athena be a character. That's a personal dislike. I think you made the helpful distinction of like within the work itself. I don't think that'd be something that bugged me if I hadn't read the original or wasn't expecting something from this. But I think we've lost something there by making it too human of a story.
Yeah. And it did seem to me like the right reading, at least the reading that strongly suggests it, is that she's something like a manifestation of Odysseus's guilt. You see the murder of an Athenian priestess, a Trojan Athenian priestess, for no reason. And she sort of follows him around until the cathartic moment where he's speaking to Penelope. And that you get that, certainly that's a more naturalist reading than Athena taking on. Another example of this is Athena takes on, I think she becomes mentor to Telemachus's mentor and helps him move through, travel to the other Greek city-states. But in this film, there's a real mentor and he dies. So there's something somewhat pessimistic about that. One other bit that's worth touching on is, I don't know if this idea around Zeus's law didn't exactly come together for me. It's hard to really crystallize it into a useful norm. The use of the Trojan horse is painted as a violation of Zeus's law, but the Achaeans and the Trojans are at war. And you could also read that as the vice on the Trojan part, not on the side of Odysseus. And then there's also the idea that the suitors are violating Zeus's law. And in the scene, I think it is made much less ambiguous and more morally palpable to modern audiences. The suitors are actively threatening his life. It shows how they're conspiring to kill Telemachus, his son. Even some of the female servants are playing an active role in trying to kill Telemachus. Uh, but at the end of the film, Odysseus still needs to atone for killing them, as opposed to the poem where there's a risk of kicking off a blood feud, which is a different thing from a violation of Xenia. So that overarching theme didn't exactly come together to me. It's hard for me to see how it was coherent, other than something more like a little more, something more a little bit more empty, as opposed to a real, say, moral norm or system.
Yeah, because at one point, I think it's Penelope who says, something along the lines of do unto others as you would have done unto yourself, or, treat others how you want to be treated. And I mean, I don't know how much of that is a Homeric ideal, but you could very conceivably say, look, I want people to do whatever needs to be done during periods of war, while also not, come into my house and threaten my wife and child during a period of non-war. Like the situations themselves seem to be discrete and different, is what you're saying. So this kind of like analogy or carryover guilt doesn't make much sense. Is that the point you're making?
Yeah, maybe it's almost like a norm around having clean hands, as opposed to do unto others as you'd have them do unto you, or be a good guest, be a good host. If you think about other Nolan films like Batman never kills his villains, even though they massacre hundreds of people. Is there a strong reason that he doesn't kill his villains? Arguably not. I guess it's just some sort of the view around purity or something like this, and perhaps one reading of the moral pictures. You want to be a good person, that means staying clear of these dilemmas, and maybe putting yourself into exile or cleaning yourself when you're caught up in them because you've become impure in some way. So.
Well, the Batman not killing is it's like a Batman. That's part of the Batman greater universe. So Nolan's definitely falling in line with that by keeping that going. And I know there's like a big controversy, as much as you can have a controversy about these things, when Ben Affleck's Batman was just like shooting people with guns. People were quite like, what is going on? This is not Batman. But I'm just trying to narrow down on this because I do think you're onto something. I'm just trying to wrap my head around it. It's like Matt Damon's character feels a lot of guilt, and that's something that Nolan's interested in. I mean, if you think about Interstellar, if you think about Oppenheimer has this idea of being guilty for unleashing something, changing a new norm in the pursuit of a short-term goal that like changes things moving forward. He invents the atomic bomb. Now, people's lives are at stake. In Interstellar, there's this idea of like going to do an important task and journey, and then you're away from your family for a long time and you're not with them as they grow up. And in Batman, there's like this hyper commitment to your job, maybe the expense of your personal relationships. I mean, these might be a bit wide, but there's this idea of guilt. Characters that are, I heard someone else say this, like Christopher Nolan's films are all about characters who are a bit too obsessed with their jobs. But I think there's this thing about people that are like, there's this guilt, and how do they come to terms with that guilt? And it's a complicated guilt. It's guilt usually in pursuit of something more important or some conception of the good that is a bit more complicated. And when we get in Odysseus, we get that same kind of theme played out around. He feels guilty about the pursuit of a good or a goal and the implications that has had, which is not the same thing as violating Zeus's law. And in the attempt to combine those, you've kind of muddied it a bit. You've brought the Nolan theme in with the Homeric theme, and that just gets a bit confused and doesn't land for you. Is that right?
Yeah, well, I think it's inconsistent. It's not clear to me what the moral takeaway would be from Zeus's law as such, because I don't think it's precisely stated what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense then.
Unless it's something more more implicit, like something around moral purity, perhaps.
Yeah, I don't think it's that. I mean, it shouldn't be that. Yeah.
Yeah. The last thing to touch on, do you have a hard stop?
No, go ahead.
The last thing to touch on this is that you could read this as an optimistic ending for so many of Nolan's characters, because you do have the guilt, you have the struggles with memory, trying to make sense of one's past. But at the end of the film, Odysseus is reconciled and he gets to go on a cruise with Penelope. Doesn't need to work anymore. He is reconciled with his family. He makes space for his son to become the king. So I don't like that ending as much, because Odysseus is no longer the king. He should be the king, of course. But maybe that is one way to see it in the Nolan canon, is this is a character who's reconciled with his past. But in order to do that, you need to come to peace with with your own past, make space for the next generation, and give up your task and focus on your family or something of that sort.
You got to quit your job. It's time to retire, Chris.
It's time to retire. Yeah, it's an anti-gerontocracy message.
But there's there's that theme of, I mean, this is clarifying in my mind, at least as we're talking about it. It's a different theme to the original Odyssey. It's this theme of, part of the way he's atoning there for his guilt is by going into exile. He doesn't attempt to continue on as king, which I agree, I would have preferred to see him continue as king. He kind of is like, I've broken this rule. And it's so black and white almost. Like, Telemachus gets out of that ending without having to kill anybody. Like, Telemachus is pure. His hands aren't dirty. I mean, maybe, he kills the one person in self-defense that swung the spear at him first, the one servant that was in the weapons room. But Telemachus gets out of that without having killed any of the guests, or participated in hanging the servants like they do in the original. And so he's got the clear hands, as you were saying. He's got the clean hands, and Odysseus doesn't. But Odysseus kind of absconds. He removes himself from the situation with Penelope, and that allows kind of pure and protected Telemachus to take on, which I think is consistent. It makes sense now that we've talked it through, or at least it makes sense to me. It's just, to your point, it just doesn't kind of reconcile this idea of Zeus's law. It's kind of like it's a different story.
Yeah, and maybe if you wanted to keep on supporting the film or thinking about this some more, it does sort of raise the question that a lot of perhaps our moral norms are not to be taken literally in a way, or there's something implicit in them. Trying to reconcile this idea of that you touched on earlier, of feeling guilt over what it took to win while remaining a winner. Like, it is interesting that you have the cathartic scene with Penelope and Odysseus wonders if he's worthy after all the things he's done. And the answer appears to be yes, you are worthy. Even though, according to at least the film's logic, you have participated in the slaughter of all these Trojans, lost all your men, you're still the one. So what does that say about the standing of Zeus's law? Maybe that's part of the undercutting message.
Yeah, you are still worthy. So time to go kill these 50 people by yourself. And I think part of the reason, we haven't talked about this at all, but I think part of the reason why this movie works, or part of what makes the ending so cathartic, is just how weaselly, I was going to say Edward Cullen, but, what's his name? Patterson. I always said Patterson by accident. Robert Pattinson's character he's so weaselly in this. He does such a good job of just like contributing to the catharsis of the ending. So you don't stop too long and think, oh, is this really and then there's even the scene, like even in that ending, some people are like kneeling down and they're like basically like giving up, holding the white flag, and Odysseus is like sparing them, instead of just keeping things going. It's just um and that, yeah, the catharsis is relies on adhering to some contemporary norms about that honorable battle, as you were saying.
Yeah, this is one of the ways I think in which Nolan is more stoic than Homer, where the revenge on the suitors does seem more justified. He goes out of his way to show the suitors it's attempting to kill his family, and then in the moment they're trying to kill him. He's not, in the poem, I think there's a priest or a oracle of such who basically, begs for his life at Odysseus's knees and says, spare me. I did try to make the suitors behave reasonably and such. And Odysseus effectively says, well, yes, you still prayed for my wife's hand. And that was your death warrant. So there's none of that in the film, which arguably makes him more just, more stoic.
Well, great. That was super
Cool.
fun.
Anyway, yeah, that was fun. Any last few words you want to?
I mean, I read a bit of an Emily Wilson. So Emily Wilson is the translator of the Odyssey, and it was funny because I listened to her New York Times interview before the Odyssey came out. She was like, I'm just excited to see it. Like, everybody gets to make their version of the Odyssey. The Odyssey's always been translated. These people that are fighting over the purism of the casting, or, they don't really get it. There's like a lot of liberty. And then she put out quite a scathing review afterwards, I think, about the differences. And in terms of the Hollywood spectrum of accuracy of portrayal, along with like digestibility for a normal audience, and a normal audience doesn't know who these people are or doesn't know anything about this story other than it's a guy who goes on a trip. I think he really impressively threaded the needle on those two separate goals. And so it's pretty admirable. It's pretty admirable for that. And I'm always just positive on anything that's going to bring to light the kind of value of these stories or the interesting aspects of these stories, getting more people interested in classics, getting more people interested in, Homer and kind of what we can learn from that time period. So, really enjoyed it. Would love if he made a Troy next or something like this. But I think we really nailed it. I think in this conversation, really clarify what confused me is those questions of guilt, regret, PTSD, shame, and what it means to kind of clean your hands of those, and progress on to the next stage of your life honorably. That is though that's new, and it's okay that it's new, but it's kind of in conflict with this idea of being a guest, being a good host, and Zeus's law, which gets brought in. And I think that's the kind of clumsiness of the story, for me, that we got really down to the core of it.
Yeah, it's a big film, a little messy, doesn't completely come together, but it is a film I think you should watch and assess on its own merits. Lots of people, some classicists loved it, others despised it. People on the right say it's too feminist. Others on the left say it's not feminist enough. You should just watch the film yourself and I wouldn't say not trust reviews. There are many insightful reviews, but it's a good case where you can watch a film and see just how many people were wrong about what actually happens in the film, or have, or maybe playing for clicks, or one nice. Looking, have already decided what the film is going to be before watching it. So I think it is a good case of that, and an even better trigger perhaps to return to the Odyssey itself and think through some of the ideas you encounter there. And because that's something I think Epictetus says, you should know these stories, Odyssey, the Iliad. So there's a lot there that are worth thinking through, and some of the central texts, I suppose, of our civilization. So all good things.
Thanks, Phil.
Awesome. Thanks for doing this.